ask him? Still much? Hij woont hier vlak om de hoek, in Cambridge, Engeland. Vanaf de kermis is het 5 minuten lopen naar zijn huis. Het is zondagmiddag. Hij haat kermis, naar ik veronderstel. Hij noemt zichzelf een verzamelaar van stiltes. Niemand begrijpt waarom het geluid in onze cultuur toeneemt. Een Haydn-symfonie is vele malen zachter dan een Beethoven-symfonie. En Beethoven was weer decibellen zachter dan Wagner. En inmiddels is Stravinsky 10 maal zo hard als de Haydn-symfonie. Niemand begrijpt waarom. De herrie die ons vandaag de dag echt overal omringt, is misschien een manier om onze angsten te bezweren. Misschien. Ik weet het niet. Nooit zal hij hier komen, ook al woont hij om de hoek. Deze beelden, ze doen er dus niet toe. Maar mooi zijn ze wel. Zeker met de laatste compositie van Schubert eronder, die hij schreef vlak voor zijn dood, toen hij wist dat hij al stervende was. We zullen erover te spreken komen. Zoals over de liefde, over het gerechtshof van de herinnering en over de lezende filosoof van Chardin. En over die ene vraag zal het gaan. De vraag die hij zichzelf stelde 9 jaar geleden toen we elkaar voor het eerst ontmoetten. De vraag die op een vreemde manier alles te maken heeft met schoonheid en mogelijk met troost. Hoe is het in godsnaam mogelijk dat mensen die van Rilke en Goethe houden, ja die 's avonds schitterend Beethoven spelen op de piano, hoe kan het dat die mensen de volgende ochtend naar hun werk gaan in een concentratiekamp, waar ze mensen afmaken alsof ze slechts formulieren afstempelen?
It's a terrible question of embarras de richesse. You've got to give me a few seconds.
Take your time.
Because there's too much, you know. And I don't...
62 years of reading.
Exactly, and you're asking... Terrible question. Terrible question.
Well, if the answer is impossible, we've...
No, of course it's not impossible.
Well, I think it is.
No.
There's too much to everything. You remember?
She knows it's tea time, sorry. Tell me when you're ready.
We're ready.
Even very great writers rarely change the power of very simple words. We all now come after Ernest Hemingway. Nobody has used the little word "and" again in the same way since Hemingway. And one of the great passages which illustrates all my worries about people no longer recognizing great references, people becoming deaf to the most moving literature, are in one little passage from the novel The Sun Also Rises. The title, of course, is from Ecclesiastes in the Bible, or it's known in the English edition as Fiesta. Two very close friends are on a bus, and they think they love each other. They think they are really, totally true to each other. We went through the forest, and the road came out and turned along a rise of land, and out ahead of us was a rolling green plain and the dark mountains beyond it. These were not like the brown, heat-baked mountains we had left behind. These were wooded, and there were clouds coming down from them. The green plain stretched off. It was cut by fences, and the white of the road showed through the trunks of a double line of trees that crossed the plain towards the north. As we came to the edge of the rise, we saw the red roofs and white houses of Burguete ahead, strung out on the plain, and away off on the shoulder of the first dark mountain was the gray, metal-sheathed roof of the monastery of Roncesvalles. "There's Roncesvalles," I said. "Where?" "Way off. There, where the mountains start." "It's cold up here," Bill said. "It's high," I said. Must be 1,200 meters. It's awful cold, Bill said. Kosovo is the place where in the great medieval epic of Roland and his friends are betrayed by one of their number and butchered in an ambush of the Saracens. The genius of Hemingway is not to say so. Only the word Kosovo tells us that these two friends are going to betray each other, that they are on the edge of the end of their relationship. And then the repetition. It's cold up here, Bill said. It's awful cold. And of course it is the cold of the heart. And only a very great artist can say everything without saying anything. The importance of this is that my Oxford and Cambridge students, my Geneva, no longer my Harvard, recognize Kosovo. So that our next editions have to have a footnote which kills the whole thing. And that Hemingway, in his period and for his public, which was a general public, this was a success novel, could assume that the word Kosovo
Was known.
Was all you needed. And we're reaching the point where the word Elsinore will need a footnote. You know, where anything, well, La Mancha no longer is recognized. This is very frightening.
Nee, op de kermis zul je er niet snel tegenkomen. Dus vergeet deze beelden van vlak om de hoek. Maar misschien is het ook misleidend om met Hemingway te beginnen. Steiner in de rol van cultuurpessimist. Bang dat het boek, ja, dat de collectieve herinnering uit zal sterven. Dat beeld kennen we van hem. Vandaag zouden we het hebben over schoonheid en troost. Toen ik hem uitnodigde, schreef hij per omgaande terug. Ik ben een boek aan het schrijven met de titel Errata. Maar het had evengoed van de schoonheid en de troost kunnen heten. Wat een wonderbaarlijk toeval. Kom maar zo snel mogelijk langs. Mijn herinneringen staan tot je beschikking.
And when one asks oneself, looking back on that kingdom of memory, where do the great movements of consolation come from? Very often the answer is different concepts, I underline different concepts of beauty, intellectual, aesthetic, profoundly personal. But the two words are, if you want, like partners in a dance, And when one comes near to thinking about the limits of language, again, which one does after a lifetime of writing too many books, giving too many lectures, speaking too much, reading too much, when one comes to think about the frontiers of language, the picture of the dance becomes more and more important. How concepts in some ways are very physical and circle around each other. And so what I meant by that was that this little book, which is a memoir, an intellectual autobiography, could have had your very moving choice of terms as a kind of subtitle. So I was rather struck and moved by the coincidence in your project and what I just happened to be at work upon.
The kingdom of memories. Memories coming back from your early childhood and later on. Are you willing them to come back deliberately, or are they coming back and are they consoling, or not at all?
Now you ask a very difficult question. Psychologists tell us that between willing and the involuntary processes of memory, one fools oneself. Nevertheless, when you sit down to write a little autobiography or an essay involving these early years, there is a part of willing. I am very, very lucky. I've had almost a photographic memory my whole life. The French lycée trained this memory just like you train the muscles of an athlete, learning by heart, by heart, by heart, to which I owe everything. I still do it at my age. There are very few days when I don't try to learn something by heart. I do long memory exercises. It's very funny, it's very childish. I recently
It's just one.
had a pretty bad fall during a Scottish trip or lecture tour. My head fell the wrong way. So I immediately, in the moment of bewilderment, asked myself whether I could do the 12 months of the French Revolutionary calendar correctly. And when that worked, I then tried another little hobby of mine. There's a list of composers who were either murdered or murdered other people, from Gesualdo to Leclerc. And immediately the memory was fine and I relaxed completely. There you have a case where an exercise, a tiny, trivial, brings great consolation, because memory, when it is strong, is also great consolation. And what is, in my profession, in my circle of friends, the nightmare, it is, of course, that memory will begin to lose its power. And that, for anyone who works in literature, in scholarship, is a death sentence. So I've been very, very lucky. The memory was strong to begin with and was systematically trained and has been in use my whole life.
One morning, Uncle Rudy drove into Salzburg. He brought back with him a small book, a pictorial guide of coats of arms in the princely city and surrounding fiefs. This memory. I'm talking about the summa summarum, where we will finally end. How important was he?
Enormously. Enormously. I can remember as if it were today the peculiar shock of wonder and terror. Let me try and explain that. Wonder at the detail of the world. I can put it no other way.
Because in the book
were maybe 50 or 100 coats of arms of the different bishops, princes, and monasteries just around Salzburg, each different. I remember my feeling, if there can be for every castle, monastery, bishop, or prince a different coat of arms, first of all, how many must there be for Austria, for Europe? An enormous sense of great numbers, of detail. I did not yet know William Blake, the great poet's favorite saying, the holiness of the minute particular. And I did not know Abi Warburg's famous saying, God is in the detail, which may actually have been said first by Thomas Aquinas. But I was physically, suddenly I said to myself, every leaf on every tree is different. Every blade of grass may be different from every other blade. Every drop of water is a universe of its own. And then immediately came the fear, as if someone had hit me in the stomach. It was a stomach feeling. If this is so, how can anyone know it all? How can anyone ever possess it all, visit it all? How can anyone ever make an inventory of the totality of available human existence? And many children do this, I believe. I began night and day writing down lists of capitals, lists of oceans, lists of popes, and endless idiocy, lists of flowers, of trees. Many children do this. I had the feeling, if you can just get the list down on paper, and if it is complete, please let me underline that, the nightmare of the missing one. If one is missing, you've lost the bet. You've lost the gamble against totality. And as I look back on my work, my deep distrust of theory, my deep distrust of the great models of totality comes probably from that day. I am fascinated by the inviolate, hard, rock-like core of the particular, of the specific, of the unrepeatable, of the actually terrifying fact that if we repeat the same sentence, the second time cannot be quite the same. The vocal cords are slightly different. You are older, the vibrations are different. I've asked great pianists, when you do a trill in a Beethoven sonata, in a Liszt study, those fantastic rap, how do you know that you're hitting the key the same number of times? And they'll smile and they'll say, we don't. Even the most accurate, even a Brendel, even the people who are the facsimile artists of a composer's score are playing ad libitum. The finger is too quick. No one ever repeats the same trill on a piano twice. Years later, I read a book, it's perhaps his deepest book, by Søren Kierkegaard, the great Danish religious thinker and philosopher, called On Repetition, where that is very much his point. And then Nietzsche who says, yes, there is eternal return. It will all come back identical. I don't believe that, but I know why he said it. Because the terror of the immensity of the particular in human existence and in the world. There are people who live with this very comfortably, who know that there are 1 quadrillion stars inside, that we will never be able to count them, never be able to name them, never be able to make a systematic index. Even the greatest star atlas is incomplete.
But for you?
It worries me. I want to know, why has the universe been organized in this way? There is a legend I love. I love legends because Heidegger used to say, if you can't think, you tell a story. And that crushes me. That is the cruelest thing you can say. He's perfectly right. Mm-hmm. But if one doesn't have a systematic intellect, and I probably don't, I love stories. The castle in Scotland, the royal castle, is called Glamis, where, for instance, the Queen Mother was brought up. And there are about 200 windows. And they decided to find out how many rooms there are in this castle by putting a candle in every window. Very easy, beautiful idea. There's always one window without a candle, however often you try to visit every room. And that I find a hauntingly beautiful image and illustration. However hard you try, there'll always be one window without a candle.
But in your childhood, it was frightening.
Frightening and
there
exciting.
Was simply too much to everything. Detail could know no end. You wrote it also generated fear.
Yes.
Why, for heaven's sake, were you making lists of almost everything in the world? Castles, knights...
popes, anti-popes, particularly anti-popes. An attempt probably to master that fear, to say, I can get it right.
But what was the fear exactly? Because you don't have
deep
the universe
in the subconscious,
under control,
there must have been deep in the subconscious the sense of otherness, that however well you try to study and understand the world, it will escape you. Mm-hmm. It will, that there will always be a strangeness. Now this is the late 1930s, before the word strangeness enters modern physics, before the word singularity, the black hole, enters. But I had some intuitive sense that in life and in the substance of the world, there was a strangeness which would always defy and even mock our attempts at understanding. And that is a rather frightening experience. Perhaps not to everybody. There are those who rejoice in this, who say, hurrah, I will relax.
A mystery. Hurrah,
I will
hurrah,
relax
hurrah.
with it. Yeah. I come from a very Voltairean Jewish rationalist tradition, which believed absurdly perhaps, in the almost infinite power of human reason. When Karl Marx said in one of the most deeply rabbinic things he ever said, humanity only asks the questions when it is ready to find the answers. He was wrong, but what a noble error. He was wrong. But at that time, or in a certain optimistic, liberal world of imagining, it looked as if that was a true promise.
If you look back at this childhood fear of not having the world under control, that nothing could ever be complete, this fear, how is your attitude towards it now? Very different or slightly different?
Slightly different. I accept it. I'm resigned to the obvious fact. B, I now realize that exhaustive, analytic footnotes of life do not necessarily contain the truth one is looking for. I know that. And one of the things that changed my whole outlook, which is not in the little book, is the following. I was briefly a guest professor in China, and I met some of the archaeologists who had been digging up these unbelievable armies of terracotta, 10, 12,000 soldiers, horses, emperors, in the tombs of the West and in Sichuan. First they told me that every single figure had a different expression on its face. So I remembered my childhood sense, but in that case, don't you want to see them all? No. We are putting the earth back over large parts of those armies. We're making sure they are dry and safe. Let them be. So I said, explain that to me. They said, those we have seen are already so wonderful. They fill our scholarship, our imagination. Let future generations have the joy of finding the next 10,000. We're telling them where they are, enough for us. That was a very important moment for me. I was deeply moved. The cliches about Chinese wisdom and Chinese sense of time suddenly came home to me in a deeply personal way. So now I say to myself, stop running around the libraries. You won't read those books in your lifetime. Others will have the joy. There are museums you will never see, landscapes in which you will never sit or see the evening light come in. All right, as long as it's possible for others after you. So my fear has shifted. It has shifted into the deliberate vandalism and destruction of our planet, of our resources. It has shifted to the question, will our children and grandchildren be able to see what we have not? If I can believe that they will, there is a lot of consolation. But that Chinese wisdom is really worth thinking about very, very hard. We would bring in the bulldozers and get all those armies out and into the museums as fast as possible. Or at least we would say we have to photograph all of them immediately. There is in the Chinese sense of leaving them unseen a great confidence, a great maturity, and a great sense of peace.
Ready now, step right up, on a 2 more this time.
I think we are what we remember, and what we have in us, they can't take away from you. Let me explain exactly what I mean. We have learned in our century that they can take everything away from you. Your house, your family, your livelihood, that we are all wanderers, more or less hunted on this earth. I would define the history of this century that now hundreds of millions of people in Africa, in the Balkans, Southeast Asia, soon in other places, are becoming Jews, quote unquote. That is to say, are becoming hunted or hunters. What you carry with you, the bastards can't touch. They tell a true story of one of the camps, Birkenau. There was a librarian of one of the great Polish Jewish seminaries, a man with one of those Torah Talmudic memories, not so rare in that culture. He knew the 5 books of Moses by heart, of course, but also much of the Talmud, the Midrash, and the Mishnah. And in the camp, he said to people, if you need to look up something, come and look it up in me. Open the book of myself. A magnificent image. I'm carrying it with me, and you can check. And don't worry that you've lost all books. Look me up. It's a story which Kafka might have found. It's one of the lasting parables. Much less dramatically. In Ezekiel, in the Old Testament, in the prophet Ezekiel, God dictates to the prophet a text and then says, I want you to eat the scroll. Careful. Eat is eat in Hebrew. Has nothing metaphoric. You put it in your mouth and you eat it like a spy eats his secret message, we're told in spy novels. And the surprised prophet does it, and of course, the meaning is it becomes part of you. It becomes totally part of you. The great Elizabethan playwright, Shakespeare's rival, Ben Jonson, will use the verb ingest, like digest, but it's more powerfully. You ingest it. You eat it, it becomes fiber of your fiber, heart of your heart, cor cordis sursum, and it will stay with you. And suddenly you realize that the house of your own inside has wonderful furniture. Most of us don't create very much. So to be able to find in our house a company of the master spirits, of the great spirits, whom Milton called them the lifeblood of the master spirits, means you come home to a very full house, to a very full house. Well, we've got to quote, we've got to quote, we've got to quote, and we've got to tell a great story, which will answer your whole question, and which I hope you will not cut out, because it doesn't concern me, but it's one of the touchstones of civilization. In the 1937 Soviet Writers' Congress, it was the worst year, or one of the worst years. One disappeared like flies every day. They told Pasternak, if you speak, they arrest you, and if you don't speak, they arrest you for ironic insubordination. 2,000 people there. Starnov on the platform, the Stalinist killer, police killer. And it was a 3-day meeting. Every speech was thanks for Brother Stalin, thanks to Father Stalin, thanks to the Leninist, Stalinist new model of truth. And not a word from Pasternak. On the 3rd day, his friend said to him, look, they're going to arrest you anyway. Please, maybe you should say something for the rest of us to carry with us. Now, he was over 6 feet, as you know, incredibly beautiful. And when Pasternak got up, everyone knew. He gets up. I'm told you could hear the silence till Vladivostok. And he gives a number. And 2,000 people got up. It was the number of a certain Shakespeare sonnet, of which he had done a translation, which the Russians say is with Pushkin one of their greatest texts, so it's Shakespeare. When I summon up remembrance of things past, the sonnet of Shakespeare on memory. I summon up remembrance of things past. And they recited it by heart, the 2,000 people, the Pasternak translation. It said everything. It said, you can't touch us, you can't destroy Shakespeare, you can't destroy the Russian language, you can't destroy the fact that we know by heart what Pasternak has given us, and they didn't arrest him. It's one of the very great stories. When a sweet session of silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past. the sweet session of silent thought. I'm told that in Russian it's even as magical, as magical. Well, in that case, the sons of bitches don't arrest you, that is, or if they do, it's too late. The other people have your treasure with them. Nobody can arrest everybody. Mandelstam's poems were all confiscated, and Nadezhda, the wife, taught one poem to 10 people. That means that for the 60 poems, 600 people had them. The 10 taught them to 10, and they were safe. They were nothing could stop. This, I think, is the deepest form of publication that we can possibly have. It's the publication of the human soul. So yes, it is central to my techniques, to my teaching, to my beliefs, to the way I work, to what I am. Remember, I belong to a people where in modern times it was said, nothing will remain of you, not even ash. And it is perfectly correct that millions of the names are gone. And no one knows where they are, because they are ash in the wind. They cannot even be buried or visited. Nazis said, the memories of memory will be gone. So the answer is no. You almost did it, but not quite.
In Chicago, there was one evening when you read for the first time Zijn und Zeit of Martin Heidegger.
Yes, that's
how important was that experience? If we talk of beauty and consolation and cultivating the most beautiful and the most consoling elements of life.
I have to stop you at the word read. I tried to read. What had happened was a very wise rule by the great Chancellor of the University, Robert Hutchins. Undergraduates were allowed to sit in on graduate seminars on the rule that they did not open their mouths. A brilliant idea. And so the proper students were around the table and the few undergraduates against the wall, keeping quiet. Wonderful idea. And Leo Strauss walked in and said, in this seminar, the name of, and he gave a name, who is strictly incomparable will never be mentioned. The phrase, who is strictly incomparable, unvergleichbar, went through me like a knife. I remember that to this day, but I hadn't understood the name. And now the point is, American graduate students, differently from many of us in Europe, are really very nice. They're very nice human beings. So I went up to one of them and I apologized. I said, I'm terribly sorry. What was the name? And he said, I will write it down for you. Martin Heidegger, 2 G's, E-R. I ran to the library. I ran. The words, who is strictly incomparable. I didn't know why he couldn't be mentioned. I knew nothing about the background, of course. And I took out Sein und Zeit. And sentence 1 was the end of my hopes. This is literally true. I was a very arrogant little boy, and most books I could handle, or I believed I could handle. Sentence 1, sentence 2, hopeless. And I stared at it and stared at it and said, one day I will try and understand it, but I'm not giving the book back yet. Its physical presence in the little dormitory room seemed to me to say, what you can't yet understand, what maybe will change your life if you do understand it, what you may never understand, what you must try to wrestle with. It's the Jacob and the angel wrestling all night. And I deeply believe that there's no harm in trying what you can't yet cope with. In America, they have a very good image for that from the sport of baseball, pitching above your head. When the ball is too quick and just over your head, you can't quite handle it yet. No harm. In a great university, in a great family, in a school, among friends, you will be introduced to things beyond your reach as yet. And your fingers will try to reach and reach, like they teach you mountaineering, rock climbing. And you say, I can't reach that next crack. I'm going to fall. My fingers are too short. My toes are slipping. My hands are getting paralyzed, and suddenly the nails go into the crack, and you hold, and you hold. You aren't yet able to pull yourself up, but even when you just hold, something very important has happened. And that was the encounter with that text. The philosophe Lisant Chardin, in one single painting, seems to me to incorporate every single aspect of what I've tried to do in my work, tried to teach as a teacher, and simply as an ordinary human being concerned with the miracle and mystery of reading. I want to show the different features. He's beautifully dressed. In fact, this fur hat and the wonderful fur coat, some have said it is meant to suggest the solemn clothes of a rabbi on a high holiday. We don't know. There is that suggestion, as there is in Rembrandt pictures, which have, of course, influenced Chardin. I like to read it differently. He's meeting his best friend, namely the author of the book. And when you meet a great friend, you dress well, like we love to wash our hands before meeting a friend. You do him, Italian word cortesia, the courtesy of heart of saying, welcome into me, welcome into the home of myself, I'm ready to receive you. He has his pen next to his reading. Serious reading means to read with a pen in your hand. What do you do with the pen? You underline, you take notes on the page, you write around the margin. What are you really doing? You are in dialogue with the book. You are answering it. You are speaking to it. And if you are very arrogant and very ambitious, you're saying secretly, I can write a better one. And that is the beginning of a certain relationship of passionate joy and love with the text. I hope our viewers can see their number of heavy coins, beautiful Roman coins. They were used at that period to give weight on the page, because in these great folios, the page would, in humidity and with time, the page would bend. So you put on it a heavy metal weight. But Chardin means much more. He's having great fun. He remembers that in Latin poetry, literature has this boast, I will last longer than bronze. I will last longer than the portrait of any emperor. Horace, exegi monumentum aere perennis. I will outlive the proudest monument. Ovid says, marble and bronze and granite will not last as long as these words on the page. So he's having fun, Chardin. He says, these are wonderful medals, out of ancient times perhaps, monuments of history, but compared to the life of the word, they are quite ephemeral. They simply keep the page down for a while. Behind him are mysterious instruments of alchemy, as if he were a magician. Why is he a magician? Because when we read, through the power of imagination, there is alchemy. There are little signs on a page, and suddenly it's Hamlet, it's Madame Bovary, it's Don Quixote, it's Falstaff. What is that alchemy of magic where we collaborate with the author in giving to these little signs on the paper an immortal presence? No one has fully understood this. It needs reader and writer, we know that. It is like the alembic, something that will turn into gold, a mixture of chemicals, chemical interaction behind deep centers in the imagination, language, and suddenly something is created which will outlive its author, the book, our own life. At the end of his life, dying of stomach cancer, Flaubert screams that whore, putain, puta, Emma Bovary, is alive forever and I'm dying like a dog. It's one of the most terrible things a great artist has ever said. It's wonderfully arrogant. He's right. Emma Bovary will live forever. And it's full of a deep mystery of hatred. How can it be that the creator dies like a dog and this what? This fantastication on a page is walking across the earth immortally and will not die. The persona of this man, we are told it was a Dutch friend of Chardin, himself an artist. It has become very funny. There have been delightful lectures and essays and articles on my book about this painting, where they all say, but Steiner is a complete fool if he doesn't realize it's a portrait of him. This has become very amusing in England. People look at it and say it's he. I had never, I swear to you, but that is good naive obviousness, I had not seen it until people claim that quite obviously it's almost photographic. I don't know whether it is, but I can now begin to see that it does resemble me rather closely. And I wish I had seen it, because there are many, many famous paintings of readers, from Holbein's Erasmus, the endless Saint Jerome's, to Van Gogh and Picasso's Le Liseur, La Liseuse. Now perhaps I know why I picked this, but it was subconscious. It was a subconscious act of autobiography. If there is a resemblance, the whole story becomes even more amusing and not to be taken too seriously. Each of these things in turn has disappeared from our lives. The private library, the great books, the folio, the ceremonious way of approaching the act of reading, the pen or pencil constantly in your hand, the sense of silence. Chardin can paint silence. There aren't many painters who can do it. Vermeer supremely. Vermeer even more, because there's always a musical instrument, which means that the painting of silence is even more striking. Chardin can make the light speak to you of silence, and it does in this absolutely glorious painting, which is in the Louvre, and each visit to Paris I go to meet my friend just to make quite sure he hasn't turned the page. He's taking his time.
Did you ever change in your imagination what he is reading?
It's a lovely question. The size of the book, the whole atmosphere suggests possibly an atlas, a book of botany, possibly a book of anatomy because of the scientific instruments. It is clearly a very serious reading, and Chardin has captured the loveliness of concentration. And again, it's what the masters teach us. Concentration, said Malebranche, a French philosopher of this time, is the natural piety of the soul. This I always try to get my students never to forget. Concentration, attention, is the natural piety of the soul. You don't have to be at prayer to be pious. You're already very pious when you concentrate on something difficult and fascinating and try to let it enter into you. We take so for granted the power of the imagination from a page. It leaves me always profoundly astonished. The mystery of light, where you see the velvet of the curtain, the texture of such a painting, the texture of the paper, of the binding, of the whole civilization of the world of the book, a civilization to which we owe the images, the book of life, the book of Revelation. And perhaps one last time, in the French modernist, symbolist poet Stéphane Mallarmé, when he says, what is the aim and object of the universe? Le livre, with a capital L, the book of all books, the book which will contain all books and the sum of human life, and which then, as the Bible has it, we will shut and the seven seals will close it. that Dante saw Beatrice when she was 9 years old, and that was it, the whole universe, I believe totally. Makes entire sense to me. That the Greek word is anagnorisis, strange word, the shock of recognition, the comet light, the flash, the sunlight in your body and everything. This is it. It happens around a street corner. You enter a shop and see someone, a shadow on a wall. Does it happen twice? We don't really know. Plato, Dante, Proust, some of the ultimate masters of the meditation on eros suggest it happens only once, and that our later love experiences are a compromise, a mimesis, an imitatio, an attempt to recapture it. Other men say, no, the great love of my life came very late, was totally different from my youth. I've been immensely fortunate, fortunate beyond words, in that these moments, epiphanies, Joyce's great word, epiphany, when the light shines through life, have left me not with a sense of utter regret, because, for instance, with that first young woman, there never was a relationship. She thought quite rightly that I was a ridiculous goose. And a number of times in my life, it's been only a moment, each one of them has built, I believe, towards my marriage with a very remarkable woman. We've now been together 45 years. And with the acceptance of a seemingly dark word, allow me a few moments because we're touching on something very central. One of the sayings that guides my life is by the great poet Rilke. Rilke says, when there has been a deeply happy love, later on, one becomes the loving guardian of the other's solitude. A word of such depths. Eros does not last forever. Passion does not last forever. I believe, again, contra the incredible Freudian exaggerations, that sexuality, powerful, wonderful, miraculous, is only one of many fundamental forces, and for many human beings, not the most important, but to become the loving guardian of the other's solitude. You move into friendship. Love moves into supreme friendship. And it may be that friendship is finally more important than love. Montaigne said this. It's one of the great taboos in our culture. The Greeks knew this. There are moments in Keats's letters when he says it. Very few have dared say it. The sacredness of friendship, the inviolate elective affinity, Wahlverwandtschaften. What does Montaigne say about La Boétie? It's because he's he and I am I. There's no explanation. That great definition of friendship can be between a man and a woman. And if a marriage flows into friendship, one has been blessed beyond words. Then the early epiphanies have flourished, matured into something enduring. I cannot imagine my existence without being in love in a certain sense. That is to say, I associate love with the future tense. Nothing mystical in this. Please, please let me argue for its simplicity, for its concrete meaning. Nothing mystical. We don't know whether animals have a future tense of the verb. Tomorrow. We do. We can do something which is unbelievable. Astronomers speak about 1 billion years from now and give exact predictions. You and I can speak about the Monday morning after our funeral. What kind of day will it be? What will be the restaurant menu, the plat du jour? What will be going on in the politics of the Labour Party and so on?
Who will talk about us, yeah.
Who will talk us? The future tense. To be in love is to have a future tense, is to think that things have a meaning tomorrow, that you are moving towards another human identity, a real presence, and that what you think, what you do, when you brush your teeth in the morning in love, it's rather different. There is a wonderful poem by Robert Graves. And to explain to our viewers, we come back to Homer. One always comes back to Homer. The great 18th century English translator, Pope, did a wonderful Homer, but a little stiff. And what English children love are nonsense rhymes by Edward Lear, the Jumblies and the Wumblies and all them. And this little poem says, we learned Pope's Iliad by rote, which means by drill, by school drill. We learned Lear's nonsense rhymes by heart. O children, learn to tell these two apart, and never say that aught I wrote in love, I wrote only for love of art. And that says it. What you write in love, you have learned like the nonsense rhymes. It changes the world. I can imagine that there are great abstract powers of mind. Wittgenstein would come to mind, Descartes certainly, Aristotle, for whom this is not true, for whom a certain solitude is the absolute condition of systematically going to the deep, deep, deep places of recognition. Are they enviable? I don't know. I can't imagine myself into their lonely shoes. And I do admire people who are not afraid of being alone, very much. They again have a reinsurance against disaster. Nothing can touch them. And there are really people, Pascal is another one, who say unless you can sit totally alone in an empty room, you haven't become a mature, complete human being. No, I haven't. No, I haven't. I wait for the knock on the door when I'm in that room. And I know that to be true, and it's again the limits of one's work and the limits of one's understanding. But when that knock comes, again and again in my life, I've heard the footfall on the stairs of the beloved before she had entered the house, and that is a true experience. There is a projective passion when the feet are coming closer. Dante knew all about that. Great art knows all about that. Music knows all about that. And yes, it makes one extremely vulnerable, extremely. But I love keeping that wound open.
Yeah, at the same time, philosophizing about love. That wonderful passage in Errata. I have stood through a rain-sodden night to catch a glimpse of the beloved turning a corner. Perhaps it was not even she. God have mercy on those we have never known, the hallucination of light which fills the dark during such a vigil.
I totally believe that. People who are immune to these crises, I'm sorry for. Perhaps one envies them. The illness of need, which is love, the sense that one is incomplete, that one is, as it were, limping on one leg of the heart until one is with the other being. The insane things we do, the phone calls in the night, the trips to the airports, the attempts to guess where the other person is, completely irrational. I think life would be beggarly without them. But I repeat, the great ascetic, the saint, the pure metaphysician, perhaps the great mathematician, has no time for this.
You have.
I've had it, and now that I'm really very old, perhaps it's getting worse. I'm now beginning to understand Yeats's great poems about the rage of love in the old. And when Dylan Thomas writes, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. He's talking both of his father's death and of the terror of the eclipse of love. I think when one will no longer have a physical shock at the sight of a beautiful woman passing by, of meeting the eyes of a beloved, then the winter will have begun.
quote you. What other human presence can be stranger to myself than at times I am? You asked. Did the image of yourself as a stranger to yourself change the last years, getting older?
This is, of course, as you know better than I, the attempt to return to the Delphic oracle's commandment that we should know ourselves, or to the subtitle of the book, An Examined Life, the Socratic assertion that only an examined life is worth living. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe there are very happy people who don't present themselves for that exam, because one usually fails. If one is honest with oneself, that's what the word errata means. The margin of disappointment is very great, and if you're really taught to think and to feel against yourself, which is one of Hegel's great teachings, and I am a Hegelian in some senses, the lives one should have led, the other possibilities, get disturbingly vivid.
The more you grow.
The more you examine what actually has been. And you begin thinking of the moments in your life which are unbearably shaming and shameful, which are disgraceful, deeply disgraceful. The moments when you were a coward, or when you betrayed someone close to you, or when you lied profoundly, or when you simply did second-rate work, when you know that it was second-rate. The last judgment is first of all ours. The tribunal is ours. I have a terrible suspicion that the real last judgment in the other world is a group of French professors. I have a real nightmare, and there'll be a long line like at the baccalaureate, and it will exactly be a French system with 1/18 of a point sending you to hell. So I hope I'm wrong. But somehow in this Kafka world, it's Monsieur le Professeur of the Sorbonne who are sitting up there waiting for the concours, and it's run like a concours. I'm very worried about that. If it's true, I at least want to be on the jury, but that's my own arrogant and selfish hope. No. If you appear in front of the court of your own remembrance and call for consolation, the best consolation is forgetting, and I'm a very bad forgetter. I wish I weren't. There are quite awful moments in one's life, but let me step a little away from the anecdote to raise some of the taboo subjects, some of the things people will not face in themselves, why they're strangers to themselves. In the last few days, we have had the dreadful news of the earthquakes at Assisi in Italy and in Umbria. And things have been destroyed which I haven't yet seen or which I have seen. And in the streets 2 or 3 days later, say the journalists, the homeless people were screaming with rage, why is the whole world talking about 1/8 of an inch of a Giotto fresco or a Cimabue fragment, and no one is helping us, the living? I have no answer to that. During the war, the British diplomat Harold Nicholson was asked if you had to choose between the life of your son, who was fighting at Monte Cassino, and the survival of the city of Florence, which would you choose? And that British scholar, gentleman, had the immense courage, the transcendental honesty to say Florence, because my grief may be unbearable, but for centuries to come, human beings will still have Florence. I've spent my life dangerously investing passion in art, literature, philosophy, music, and have certainly not always invested it in human relations. There is a little list I say to myself on very dark nights at 3 in the morning. The people who have loved their dogs, their animals, more than any human being. It's a very worrying list. It includes Richard Wagner, Nietzsche, Heidegger and Adolf Hitler, but there are many more. I know that I've actually said this publicly, and it has caused very great resentment. People say it makes them sick because I've said it. If the torturers touched one's wife or children, I believe you could scream to them, "Hold out," because they would know what it was about. I know that if anybody began torturing my dog, I would break down in 10 seconds and betray everybody. I know that. I can't defend it. I can't excuse it. I can't explain it, which is even more disturbing. I believe it to be the truth, and it's one of the great taboo truths in modern psychology. But many other examples where one has let down what one knew to be the ideal for profoundly selfish or ambitious or intellectually luxurious reasons. The exam begins to be very harsh and very difficult to answer certain questions. And others will judge as they may wish to judge, but perhaps we let ourselves off sometimes a little too easily in our own sense of self. And when Socrates says, "Know thyself," he meant something full of sunlight, like Athens at 12 o'clock noon, that brilliant light and the blue of the sea. I think he was perhaps a little naive. How dare I say it, but I say that. To really know oneself, the Montaigne image, you go down the spiral staircase of the tower into a great dark, into a Piranesi dark. It's not all sunlight. But one must try and do it. And unless you're prepared to go down that staircase, you inhabit a marionette. You inhabit a fake commedia of the self. And no one else can do it for you. No psychoanalyst, no father confessor, no therapist, no cry therapy, no group conscious exercises on the California uplands, no LSD. You damn well have to try and do it yourself, sitting alone on a rather uncomfortable chair with no help, and saying, who the hell was responsible for what went wrong? Answer yourself. Answer yourself. And to me, a great education, the final justification of an education, is if you force yourself down those stairs, and if you can come up again, certainly damaged, certainly deeply saddened and disturbed, but that you do not take refuge either in blaming others, or in blaming society, or in blaming some organic defect. My God, we will soon have viruses of stupidity. The stupidity is only one's own. Take the next move. That's superhuman.
What do you mean?
This movement, superhuman. The whole sadness of the world. Superhuman. Dying. We're an animal which can produce that. And there were many men, as you know, who loved it and played it and then produced concentration camps. The same men. In those same streets.
So just a little bit more loud so that we can...
You want it louder?
No, not louder.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's good. Because I don't know why at this very moment you were always busy with the question, how can people who in the evening read Rilke, yeah, or love Beethoven,
Or play Schubert.
or play Schubert or play Beethoven, can slaughter people, other people in the morning as if stamping forms?
Yeah.
Did you get any further with the answer?
I have no answer. It's probably the question which has dominated my work and other human beings' identification of my work. That question is always seen as I've asked it my whole life, and was one of the first to ask it. Nearer the end of my life, I find no theory acceptable, not the idea of a collective schizophrenia, not the idea which Köstler in this very room always said to me, but I have the answer. Part of our brain is prehistoric, sadistic animal, and only a tiny part is evolved humanity, and they haven't got together. It's a lovely story. There's not a shred of evidence for it. I've then, as you know, been even more pessimistic. Could it be that in very high culture there is something inhuman? We've spoken about it already. Walter Benjamin, great master, said, the foundation of every cultural monument is a piece of barbarism. That's too extreme again. I have no answer. I know that for me, without this movement of the Schubert posthumous quintet, much in life would not be worth living. I couldn't bear. I've said in errata that to lose one's eyesight must be unimaginably terrible. But I do carry a lot of literature in myself. A lot of luggage would stay with me. Not to be able to hear music anymore, I believe to be the darker darkness of the two. May God preserve me from it. But the presence of such a work defines for me the inexhaustible magic and terror of Europe, the coexistence in the same heartland of the highest that man has achieved and of the lowest, of the most inhuman and sadistic. If we knew that music like that made you incapable of doing certain things, we would be safe. And perhaps man is not meant to feel safe. There is a wonderfully anti-Semitic joke by Hegel, but a wonderful one. Hegel says, God comes, and there's a Jew in front of him, and God says, in one hand I have eternal salvation for you, and in the other I have tomorrow morning's newspaper. Which do you choose? And the Jew, of course, says Hegel chooses a newspaper. And I entirely understand this, because there is something in us which does not want to come to rest, which does not want peace and safety, which wants to live on the edge, which wants to be in inner doubt, in inner questioning. And that is our dignitas as thinking human beings, but it seems to make us capable of, and perhaps in need of, great savageries, great cruelties. We grow impatient with peace, we grow impatient with repose, we grow impatient with decency. That is a very dangerous sort. But there is something about decency which brings out in us a certain arrogant boredom. We are fascinated by the dark. We always have been, since the beginning of great art. The number of human beings who read the Inferno of Dante over and over is 100 times those who read the Paradiso, and has always been so from the beginning. There's a terrific problem there, where Freud did say some very interesting things about tragedy, saying we keep returning to blackness so as to be able to endure it, so that we control our own fear of it. Yes, but why do we do it to other human beings? And to that I have no answer. But because there was a Schubert, maybe, somewhere there is an excuse for the rest of us.